Helen Sieroda, it's wonderful to see you, even though you are in England, and I know you are in a beautiful setting, and it is as if I'm there with you, overlooking the moors. But here we are, meeting from the Academy of Psychosynthesis, where you spent such a long time teaching and building it up. And I will just hand over to you to introduce yourself and say whatever you want to say about your place in the world and whatever you see emerging on the horizon.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. So it's lovely. It's lovely to see into a room at the Academy and feel like I am there again. It's been quite a long time since I've been there. 30th anniversary, we were just saying.
That's right. You were here 3 years ago, 4 years ago now, I think, before the pandemic, and you shared the celebration with us when we had our 30th anniversary celebration, and then Eric Hedblad came in as director and principal.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is wonderful is that the pandemic has shown us that we can connect over great distances and work globally while we're in our little local places. And I think that's one of the focuses or perspectives that I'm bringing into my work now, and that I think will probably find its way into this conversation. Because I have always, you've known me for years. I mean, I was in the Academy, working in the Academy for 25 years. And I started off in the very early days with Margot Russell. And she invited me in at the very beginning to help her set up the organization. So I was there before the first course began. I was helping with admin, writing notes to prospective students. And I thought I'd be there for about 2 or 3 years just to help get it off the ground. That was the plan, to get the first group out, and then we were going to build organizational capacity and train up new Swedish trainers. So 3 years turned into 25.
25 years.
25 years of regular, I had a break when I had my son. He's more than 25 years. Anyway, 1990 was, you do the maths. Maths isn't my strength. So 1990.
It's a long time. It's nearly 30 years.
It's 30 years, and I was there for 25 odd years.
That's a long time.
And it was wonderful to help establish the organization, to support Margot. We had such fun. There were some dramas and difficulties along the way, but mostly it was just a delight. I feel like Sweden, Stockholm in particular, is kind of deep, the seeds planted deep in my soul, like my sense of connection, although I haven't been there for quite a while and I don't work there anymore. But that monthly commute was a big part of my life, big chunk of my working life.
It's a way of connecting to a culture, isn't it? And of a way of being that's part of the Swedish society and the Swedish way of relating to the world in overall terms.
Absolutely. And I think that maybe because you're in it, you don't realize what a gift and how unique that perspective is. And I noticed it, funnily enough, because I'd become quite encultured. I thought that the way that you do things there was the way people do things. And then when I left and started working in the UK with corporations and organizations here, I just thought, my goodness, they're 20 years behind in terms of thinking about sustainability and the connections and working together, collaboration, or many things that people would look at me and think I would come off another planet. Whereas I could talk about it in Sweden and people would go, yeah.
Yeah, there's something about this you often say, you know, it's about the we and not so much about the me, and that is coming into the world more and more. And you say that you notice this in your coaching training as well, the need for the collective to connect and come together for a purpose, for a long-term perspective, many different perspectives, right?
Yes, indeed. And I think something that's been with me since my 20s, probably for a long time, was this understanding or this recognition that we are interconnected, that we are unentangled, that we are dependent on each other in a good way, well, for good or ill, actually. That those interrelationships are the thing that I think throughout my working life has been the thing that interests me. And to think in terms of relationship and thinking in terms of pattern and thinking in terms of context is something that I've brought into my work from the beginning. So yes, I think so. And I think probably, you know, these times with the pandemic, I think maybe that has made the general population more aware of that interconnectedness. What Thich Nhat Hanh, who was my teacher, would call interbeing. And the other thing I think maybe that the pandemic has taught us en masse is that we have to get used to not knowing. There is uncertainty. We cannot predict everything. That unexpected things will happen. That the plans that we had, I think the big learning I had early on in the pandemic was, and from the people I was working with, we all had our plans, whether it was plans for work, for holidays, plans to see family. And we discovered that we had to hold our plans lightly because we didn't know. We had to get used to not knowing. Didn't mean that we stopped making plans, but we had to hold those plans more lightly and expect the unexpected and become more adaptable, more flexible, more humble about stuff.
And yes, I agree with you. I really do. And I think that, you know, when we need to hold our plans more lightly, what is it there that we then need to strengthen within ourselves so that we can let go of the ideas we have about a predestined future? When interbeing or interconnectedness is core in what in the story that you're bringing in here, and that I recognize and agree with, you know. Shall I go back to my question?
So the question, yes. So focus in on the question, and then I'll see if I can focus in on an answer.
Yeah, it's if we have to let go of the plans we have because the changes that are facing our everyday life and perhaps even humanity, but in particular now we have had a pandemic, and then there is this war, the aggression in the Ukraine, and it influences Europe, it influences the world. So if we have to let go of some of the structure plans we have or ideas we have about a predestined future, what is it that we need to build on or strengthen for us to be able to cope?
Well, I think there's both there's a short and a long answer.
There usually is.
I'll go with the shorter answer. So I think that, you know, we have the pandemic, we have the influences of migration, war, global economics, environmental. We've not mentioned climate change. You know, the environmental precipice that we stand on. That is hard to get your head around that. And political changes, you know, the shift from rights and the shift to more, you know, it seems like dictators. This is a good day for the big, strong leader who will kind of lead us like lemmings over that cliff. Without, you know, democracy seems to be under threat. So I think one of the certainties, this is a bit of an aside, but I think one of the certainties we may have had was that democracy is here, and the way things go out is this is how we are, and this is how it's going to be. And actually all of that is called into question. So it's existential questions here that are huge, and out there, or they're huge and they seem out there, but they're not. They're right here. And I think that's the piece, that's the piece that we need to kind of take hold of and look at, I think, is that these huge flows that seem out there, the geopolitical, climate change, wars that are over there, actually how locally are they impacting, and how locally do I respond? So to come to the simple answer, so that wasn't the answer, that was the context. And I think the context is important.
Absolutely, I agree.
And so I think we need to hold that wider context, and then we need to say, well, change is local, change is particular, and it's in those unique, specific, small patterns here that we can, and the history that led to that, where we can begin to make sense of what we are, and then out of that begin to find ways forward. So I mentioned earlier off camera that I've just made a radio program about my allotment, and that's the place where I learn about the cosmos and the whole kind of climate change. It's all here in that little place, and in the way that I'm planting broad beans and the birds that I watch there. And anyway, I won't go into all of that. That's another story. So what do we need to do? Well, I think one thing that, if we think of our big plans and our strategies, to go back to your question. So if we think about planning and strategy, what does all of this change, and what do these interconnections mean in the light of how we would usually go about planning? And I think that's a place where those of us who are trained in psychosynthesis, the work of the academy, I think that's a place where we could really serve the whole, because we know how to work with deeper values. We know how to help people connect with those deeper values, with what really matters here. It's not just about the vision of the sunny uplands 10 years from now. I think those days of having 5-year plans and 10-year plans doesn't mean that we don't plan, because that's what humans do, but I think we need to hold those visions and plans differently. So I would say a key task is to look at the values and the visions that underpin the plans, because the plans will have to change. We have to hold them lightly, but but the values and the principles that guide the organization through the ups and downs of things not turning out as planned, I think that gives you a place to stand. So if I think of my own example with Wise Goose, when the pandemic hit, there were many organizations that were just immediately pivoting to online without thinking. They would just do exactly the same thing that they'd always done online, and I didn't. So we stopped and connected with the values. What is it that we want to serve here? What are we here for? And at the core of that was wanting to support the current students in having a good experience so they could finish their training, and wanting them to have a good experience, and wanting them to learn and grow, wanting to help them flourish, to support their well-being through the uncertainties. And so coming back to that, it was a question of quality. What quality, what is the quality of what we can offer, and how can we move on to Zoom or whatever? How can we do that in a way that maintains the relationships, maintains the connection, maintains the quality, nurtures that?
Yeah.
So it took a while to find out how best to do that.
But it's important to take the time for connection and for
Yeah.
going a bit deeper, perhaps, and connecting with the values.
Yeah, yeah, and the values were what underpinned the way forward.
Yeah, because I think
things.
that will give a direction, isn't that? Because I mean, we know that whatever we talk about today, the world will certainly be different in 20 or 10 years from what we can fully imagine, right? But there's something about setting a direction, isn't there?
Yeah.
Meaningful direction,
Yeah.
purposeful direction, wouldn't you say?
I would say there's something about the vision is important.
Yeah.
So I think vision, to have a sense of where we're going, underpinned by values, is important. But I think the way that we hold that is crucial. So it's, of course we make plans. That's what human beings do, and that's what organizations do. We need to have plans and strategies and visions. I think the days of a 10-year plan are over. The days of, that's just, the uncertainty is with us. It's not going to go away now. But how we hold that, I think, is the crucial piece. So I think less hubris, that we think we can control it all. If we come from this vision of the world from the 19th century into the 20th century, that the world is like a machine and we can create and we can dictate and we can predict. And if we turn the handle here, then listen, the cogs will work. I think those days essentially are over. I mean, it doesn't mean that everything is chaotic, but it does mean that actually we need to be less arrogant about what we can do as leaders. I'm thinking as a leader here. And we need to look in terms of values I've mentioned, but also think in terms of relationship. And that's not just human relationships. This is relationship with communities that are human and more than human, the natural communities. We need to think about the context, the specific context that we are in the middle of all of these big moves. What is the context? What is going on here in this place? Because change is always local and particular. Change happens in a place. It's not some abstract thing out there. And I think that's the risk of getting too caught up in our visions, is that it becomes an abstract, sunny upland that ignores the detail and the specific context, the local, the particular, the unique patterns, the events that are happening here, the intentions that we have put into play through those visions, and the way that those values are enacted. And you've often heard me talk about wanting to look at the difference between our espoused values, the values that we speak, and our enacted values, the stuff that we do, the behaviors that we do, and just looking at the gap between those. I think now more than ever, we need to hold that. So I suppose what I'm saying is that we need to look at that local and specific, but not forget the context.
It's very interesting.
Well, and I could extrapolate that to the work that we do as psychotherapists. I don't work as a therapist anymore, but I think that the risk is that we become very focused in on the very too local and specific, like this person and their history and their personal development. And I think the door needs to open to include these wider questions. That was always what I was bringing in when I was working in the academy. That was always my passion.
Yes, I know you also worked with global psychosynthesis, or where there's a broader connection and connection with service in some way, bringing all this that I have, or that is part of me now, into the world in some way, purposeful way. But did you know that here in Sweden, I don't know whether it's the same in England, but there has been, during the pandemic, there has been a move to more to the country, because people can work from home, and because there is life in the forest and the trees and the, you know, the woodlands or the fields. So people more and more turn to summer houses or cottages in the countryside, and that is a big trend, and it can be measured, you know, even though the reasoning behind perhaps cannot be measured, but there is something about, you said, you know, losing the hubris, or letting go of how we see the future rolling out ahead of us, when it really matters. What is important to us is often found very, very close, and very close in the environment or the context where we are. So I think it's wonderful to hear you say this, and it has been I mean, I can see the enactment here. I don't know whether it's the same in Britain, but maybe. And perhaps also the spotlight of the global crisis, or the planet crisis, the environment crisis, is putting a special light on all this.
Yeah,
that's what I think. I don't know what your ideas are on that. But.
Well, there's certainly been a move towards hybrid working, and people leaving the cities for the country. In Sweden, you're so lucky that so many of you have these beautiful little summer houses that you could go to. Whereas here, you know, we're crowded. You know, Britain is well, England in particular, I think. Scotland's got more space. But, you know, we are a small country with a lot of people. So there is space to spread out, but we don't all have lovely summer houses. And we don't have room for lovely summer houses. Second homes squeeze out the locals. So there are negative impacts from that move of people out of the cities.
That's true.
But the shift to hybrid working is here. And in the work that I do, you know, I work in with corporations. I work with government. You know, on the agenda is, how do we manage flexible working and hybrid working, and how do we still feel that we are a team and still get together while still, you know, respecting people's wish to stay in the country and be nourished.
So how can that be done in this change, in this transformation? You're bringing in some from history, and we can learn from history about, you know, the steps to take to meet the future.
Yeah.
So how does that being enacted in today? What can we? How can we meet this need for connectedness, when there will be hybrid work and digitalized working places and a lot of other things going on?
Well, I think part of it is that we need to listen more deeply to, I just realized that I'm going to turn off my Outlook so it doesn't beep at us. So I didn't realize I had that on.
So listening more, listening to what?
Well, I think listening to the particulars of this context, whatever this context is.
Yeah.
I think part of the work is surfacing implicit assumptions. So one of the blocks is the assumptions that people have. Oh, well, if you're working at home, you're skiving off. You have to be in the office, overlooked by your manager to be doing good work. I think we need to surface and explore and check out those implicit assumptions about what the workplace looks like. I think that there's a place here for exploring all of the variations. So when I talk about local, what I'm thinking of is what are the specific, what's in this context? What are the local variations in this organization, in this team? And look at the detail of how do we nurture the interconnections in this place, and the patterns of what has worked. So look for those green shoots is one way of looking at it. Look for what's working.
Looking for the green shoots. That's a lovely, that makes a lovely image or metaphor. Straight away, I can almost see the green shoots. And yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Looking for the green shoots.
Looking for the green shoots, and they will be in a particular context. So there isn't, so your question was, how do we do this? And my answer is, there's no one size fits all. But what we can do to find out how to do it is to be more tentative, to be more curious, to be less certain, to experiment more. So I think organizations, particularly big organizations, I was working this week in the parliamentary estate in London, in the Palace of Westminster. So I was working in there, and that is very, it's a big organization. It has a very clear history. It has traditions. It has ways that things are done there. And so it's quite hard to ask those questions about how do we experiment more, but they're asking those questions. So how can we be less certain and more tentative? How can we be more humble in the way that we approach how we are going to do things now? I don't work with MPs, so I don't work with the politicians. So I can't speak for what's happening there, but I know that the people I work with who serve democracy and who serve the people through their work and who serve whoever is in power at that time, I know that they're doing good and powerful work within a context that's quite resistant to change, and quite not so much resistant to change, but is quite entrenched in tradition and how we do things around here. And yet change is happening in quite exciting ways, I would say. So back to your question about hybrid working. And I think this isn't just about hybrid working and what happens next. I think this is the whole thing about how do we do business? How do we lead? How do we run our organizations, from the teensy little ones like mine to the big corporations? And I think we need to experiment more and see what works.
So Helen, if we just bring in the question or the perspective was, how do we pick this up? How do we go on with this that you see and that we have talked about?
So the we is Psykosynthesakademins.
Yeah.
Is that the we that you're talking
the
about, or is
interesting
the
thing
we, or is the we psychosynthesis as an approach?
Well, the we is all really, it's a very, very open question. Psychosynthesis hopefully comes into it, but it's a very open question, because the we is really the us and all of us, and you and I, and what you talked about, bringing it all home to ourselves and our interconnectedness. So
I'm going to try and answer that and weave together a little bit of what I've already said. So
weaving is good.
So what I've been talking about has been a lot about the interweaving, the entangledness of reality, of the interconnectedness of the world, and how that's become clear during the pandemic. It will become even more obvious as climate change takes hold. So that's the world that we are. I'm saying that this is reality. It's not a hypothesis. This is how I see the reality of where we are at this point in human history, and in fact in planetary history, not just human history. So if we take that as a given, Then I've talked about how we need to become fluent at working with not knowing and uncertainty. How do we do that? Because we love to think that we can control everything and plan and have strategies, and that's going to be called into question more and more and more and more and more. And underneath that is looking for patterns of relationships. So what do we need to do differently is we need to really become willing to see those patterns of relationship and those connections. And that includes history. You know, Eric, before we got on camera, Eric was saying something about the history of psychosynthesis and psychosynthesis organizations. And I want to say that history matters, because by looking at history, we can begin to get a sense of patterns that are coming out of what has happened in the past and how those patterns operate in the present and how they feed into the future. So they're not separate things, past, present, and future. They're all alive in the same moment. So how we need to value the past, and we need to recognize that the present is shaped by the past and by past intentions, and how I talked about values. So how do present values and intentions shape where we are now and feed into the future? So I think there's a real need to recognize that history matters and to learn from that, to ask, what have I learned from this? What are the good things that have come out of this, and what are the things that we don't want to repeat? And why do they keep repeating, and how do we shift that? And that is a local question. That is a question that isn't general for everybody in psychosynthesis everywhere, or every psychosynthesis organization. I think the history of the approach is relevant, but how that is enacted is something that happens in the present. Those patterns come out in different ways. So there's not one big answer about where psychosynthesis goes.
There's never one big answer.
So to think about what might next steps be.
Yeah.
So how do we, given that summary of the interconnectedness, the values, the intentions, the importance of seeing patterns, and how that weaves into the present and the future, I would say that we need to do what we are doing now. So there's not a need, we don't need any big new brooms necessarily. So we need to do what we're doing now, but we need to look at it differently. So I think we need to review how it's going more often. So we need to review progress more, because of change and uncertainty. It won't go according to plan necessarily, or we need to expect it not to go according to plan.
And the speed of change.
The speed of change. So we need to learn and adapt. And you do that by listening to feedback from the wider system and asking questions about what capabilities do we need to strengthen this organization? I'm thinking specifically about the academy now. I'm not thinking generally. So what qualities do we need to include? What strengths do we need to incubate? To look around at what are the green shoots? Where do we see life happening? Build on what's working, build on successes. And that might look like doing something differently. So learning and adapting, experimenting more. So trying out things, and that could look like having many options available. So if you think resilience comes out of having possibilities, many options that we can choose from. If we only have one way we can go, if you only have one program, one cash cow program in an organization, eventually the cow will die.
Absolutely.
So
there's a lot that needs to be included.
So it's about including listening to different voices, valuing diversity, listening to voices that don't necessarily agree with us. So there's something about what do we include and what do we exclude. And I think the history of psychosynthesis has some challenges around inclusion and exclusion, and how do we listen in it, and how do we manage that? And then how do we have a clear vision, values that can be the guiding the organizational next steps. And adaptation isn't failure. So if I try an experiment with something, and if nobody comes, well, that's information. Well, what was it about that? What do I need to learn from that?
Yeah.
How do I find out more? How do I take that feedback and use it? So I'd say start small, start where you are. Listen deeply. Listen to other voices in the system. Find ways of getting more feedback. Try several things and see what happens. Less planning, more experimenting.
Yes.
Be more tentative, less certain.
Yeah.
And look for the variation in the detail, in the small local things that are particular to where you are.
There's certainly a lot that an organization can work on, but I think that the important message for everyone is this, handling, accepting, dealing with uncertainty. That's really is part of this time, and opening up for exploration of ways or meetings or relations that haven't been there before, opening up and seeing the green shoots. I love that. Building on the positive and appreciating the positive and making that grow more.
Indeed. Yeah. And I think the gift that psychosynthesis has is that in these times when we need to have some solid ground to stand on, then coming back to the deeper values that underpin what we do in the world, that guide us, whether we're a leader in an organization or a parent in a family or a teacher in a school, that the gift you have is that you know how to help people do that. And I would say my challenge to psychosynthesis would be to get out there and do it more, because there's a real need. And not to expect the world to come to you, but actually to help people.
I love that. Yes.
And I think to find places to make relationships, to build collaborations, to work with people outside, to not just expect the world to come through the front door of the academy.
I can honestly say there's a lot of that going on already, which is wonderful. And these interviews here, bringing in people from within psychosynthesis, broader community, but also people who are not part of psychosynthesis is one step with that, ambition or hope or wish to connect.
And to engage and think more globally, to engage outside myself, to engage outside psychosynthesis, to engage with the wider world, with the cosmos.
Beautiful.
So that's the challenge, I think, and it's quite exciting. I think it's a good challenge. I think it's I think the future is it could be very interesting.
I think that's lovely.
Yeah.
So don't stay here, but engage and connect and bring in and be out there.
Yeah.
So
and internally asking yourselves, what capacities and qualities do we need to be able to do that well?
Yeah.
So how do we develop ourselves to do that work in the world?
Finding the green shoots within ourselves and letting go of that which no longer works for us or serves us well. Yeah. So just one final word, Helen, before I know we have to, unfortunately, end. We could sit for a long time, but maybe just one final word or sentence that you'd like to pass on to us.
I would say that the you are sitting, you know, with the academy and the work that you do in psychosynthesis in the place that you do it, in Stockholm, in Scandinavia, in Sweden, that you are sitting on a treasure. And the world needs the work that you can do. And it gives me hope to know that you are there flourishing. It gives me hope to see that you're there flourishing, doing good work and exploring. So you are experimenting, you are exploring, you are looking outwards, you are looking at different ways of doing things. While building on the history and the legacy that the people who went before have left, you know, and I see myself as part of that legacy, part of the past. I'm not part of your present, but I'm part of the past. It just gives me hope to know that you're there doing the work that you do, and I don't have to be part of it. I don't have to be there doing it, but it's good to know that you're there
And
doing what you do.
You're connected to all this.
Totally, absolutely.
That's what I thought you would end with and say, but I feel connected to all this because you are.
Indeed. Indeed, I feel that connection, you know, I think it, as I say, is part of the legacy. And I feel that connection with the individuals I knew there, as well as the organization and the place.
Helen, you know, we could go on and I would love to, but I realize I need to say thank you, because otherwise Eric will have hours of editing.
It's not fair, and I have to go on. I have more meetings coming up, so I have to move
Helen,
on.
it's been wonderful to see you and to listen to you and talk to you today, and thank you for being there.